Hi, I'm Richard Vague, and this is the Tychos Weekly Comment. As data specialists, we try to note business articles that are in some way misleading, even though they didn't intend to be. For example, an article that announces with great concern a particular rise in consumer debt when the increase in question is commensurate with or less than GDP and income growth, and thus no cause for concern. Another example is one we see a lot. It's what I call the Great Household Savings article. Here is one from the Financial Times on January 24, 2023, titled, China's record $2.6 trillion rise in savings fuels revenge spending hopes. The article announces, quote, Chinese households are sitting atop the biggest pool of new savings in history, accumulating $2.6 trillion of bank deposits last year alone as strict anti-coronavirus policies crushed consumer spending. The anticipation of a wave of pent-up demand with consumers opening their wallets after China shifted decisively on tackling the pandemic is underpinning hopes for a global economic recovery. The picture here is frugal households awash in unencumbered funds ready to dash out now and consume. But let's briefly examine the three claims made here and see what's really going on. The first claim is that Chinese households are sitting atop the biggest pool of new savings in history, accumulating $2.6 trillion of bank deposits. Well, that's true, absolutely true, but in the immediate past, China's households have grown deposits by about $1.5 trillion a year, so it's not quite as startling a number as it might seem. The second claim is that strict anti-coronavirus policies crushed consumer spending. Here's where the article goes wrong. China's households didn't reduce spending, they increased spending by almost $100 billion. Now that's a lower increase than previous years, but it's still an increase. So how much less did they spend than their trend would have called for? Well, about $540 billion less. So the very most that so-called crushed consumer spending could have been of the $2.6 trillion in deposit growth would have been about 20%. So where did the rest of that $2.6 trillion in deposits come from? Where it mostly always comes from, debt, bank loans in particular. The proceeds of loans are new deposits in the accounts of borrowers. I'll put it to you simply. Most of the time, when you see a rise in deposits, it is more or less fully matched and thus in some sense offset by an increase in debt, both business and household loans. When you hear something about excess savings or a savings glut, it is most often matched by a similar excess or glut in debt because bank loans are what create most deposits. In this case, the $2.6 trillion in growth in household deposits, actually $3.4 trillion by the time you add business deposits in, are roughly matched by a $3+ trillion increase in loans. Now, central bank operations can also create deposits, and we'll get into that in the future, but today's key takeaway is that most of the time when you see a big deposit increase, it isn't just some completely unencumbered pool of money waiting to be spent. Instead, somebody somewhere has a lot more debt. Assets equal liabilities. In this case, it was in some part a step up in household debt, but an even bigger step up in business debt, which, by the way, is a reverse of what happened the prior year, when the step up in household debt was the larger. So what really happened was households took on debt, but less than in the previous year, and businesses resumed their heavy borrowing ways with loans that created a lot of deposits that added to the record deposits of households, but largely from an already over-leveraged business sector getting more leveraged. Which brings us to the third statement in the article. Quote, "This brings the anticipation of a wave of pent-up demand, with consumers opening their wallets after China shifted decisively on tackling the pandemic, and is thus underpinning hopes for a global economic recovery." Well, that may very well be true, but it has been a big increase in the already too high debt of China's businesses, already the most highly leveraged in the world. It is that, much more than the frugality of households, that has these households better positioned. That's it until next week. Thanks.